in terms of planning, in terms of execution, and in terms also of analysis of hundreds of experiments. That's why it's very important that our research outputs will have to be published and will have to be shared, because it contains important information that must be conveyed or must be relayed to the lots of audiences and stakeholders. We have to believe the research outputs. It is for sharing because it is an original research work, and these are done by scientists. And not only that, the research output that is published undergoes the review process. Okay, so the scientific publications distinctions also. So with the review process, and then with the scientific procedure, and then the review process that the research outputs undergo, we can guarantee of the quality of the scientific publications. So the authors are expected to give an amount of work by first listing the sources or reference that are used in the research output or in the submitted article, with full bibliographical information so that others can verify this. So we can verify the information sources. At the same time, we can also give proper acknowledgement to the sources of our information. And then giving full description of the methods used, because we need to have the chance or opportunity of replicating this, the research that is featured in the research output, and must be subjected to peer review, which is a verification process and review by other specialists in the specific field. So this is actually, the review process gives extended assurance for the information of the research output that is being considered for publication to be believed in. So there are benefits of scientific publications. Why we have to have the research outputs published. First is we can contribute to the public records of original contributions to knowledge. So we can enhance knowledge, and we can also encourage scientists to speak directly to one another. So we can actually talk to each other as economists. We can share our knowledge as economists, because not everybody knows what actually we know. If the journal is a prominent one, we can actually have extra measure of prestige. Will become known in our areas of expertise, and then we can actually have indirect rewards, no? Because our jobs will be much better in terms of pay and in terms also of rank. We can be promoted, and then we can also have fruitful new scientific collaborations, which is very, very important among us, no? Which are very important among us, especially that it's necessary to have networks, not only in our universities, but also across the world. So that's the reason why we apply for membership in our scientific societies. Oh, sorry. Why is it not moving? Joe, it's not moving. I sorry.
Are you okay? I mean that
yeah, nah, my presentation, my slides not moving, but it's okay now. So there are risks of doing scientific publications, no? Our competitors, of course, can see our outputs, so they can learn from what we are doing, especially in terms of scope. No, when we say scope, what's the coverage? And we can it's not only about the coverage, but how are we doing the things, especially if you are doing something that is pioneering. That's where the risk is. But it's still very important. There are ways on how to get around these risks anyway. Then careers of young scientists. Of course, young scientists, we compete with each other, no? Early career researchers compete with each other. Even in our country, in the Philippines, we compete with one another in our university and also in getting funds for our research in the DOST, the Department of Science and Technology, and in the Department of Agriculture and other funding agencies. So we have that kind of experience, and the risk also is if we have our scientific publications and not properly, if we have our research outputs not properly published, our research will be used by other researchers and us not being acknowledged properly in the process. And so those are some risks. And other researchers, whenever our research outputs are published, they can use information presented in a paper which can invalidate our findings. But if we know how we actually do our research, we can defend our research findings. So here, this is the importance of having peer review in scientific publications. So what is a peer review? So how respectable is the output that undergoes a peer review process? First is a peer review is a process of subjecting an author's scholarly work, and that is a research output or ideas, to the evaluation of others who are experts in the same field. In other words, our outputs subjected to a peer review process will be examined by those respectable experts in our field. And that is not only to have the outputs being commented on, but once we know the comments, we know how we can improve our research outputs for publication through the peer review findings. Okay, and later on, we can be sure that what we are doing is actually approved by the experts in our fields of discipline. And then the peer review process is also the foundation of the scholarly system because it can subject an author's work to the scrutiny of other experts in the field. So it will be strengthened further because the experts now gives the comments that will improve our research output. At the same time, they can actually affirm the findings of our research outputs. And it's an essential component of the academic writing process because our community is scientific. In other words, we do things in a scientific way, and our output is an academic output. So a peer review process is an essential part of an academic process, which is a writing process. So another one is the peer review process functions to encourage authors to meet the accepted high standards of their discipline. So it can actually help us meet the standards of our discipline, whether we like it or not. In the scientific publication, we have actually standards. No? So that's why based on these standards, some of our outputs will be rejected, some of our outputs will be accepted. That because of the standards. And especially high standards are always upheld by the big brands of academic publishing. What I mean by the big brands of academic publishing, the international and reputable academic publishing companies like Springer, like Nature Springer, Wiley and Sons, Taylor and Francis, Elsevier. Those are actually the big brands of academic publishing. Once their insignia is in your paper, meaning once their emblems are in your paper is usually verified as a quality research output which needs to be shared across the academic communities. So it helps ensure that papers published in scientific journals answer meaningful research questions and are able to draw accurate conclusions. So based on professionally executed experimentation. And then peer-reviewed articles are trusted form of scientific communication. That's why we need our articles to be subjected to a peer review process. It encourages authors to strive for high quality research outputs that will advance in the field. And then the peer review process also supports and maintains integrity and authenticity in the advancement of science. Okay. Oh, wait. So here we can improve the quality of our published papers. We can actually maintain the integrity of science because we will not be able, through the peer review process, through a genuine peer review process, we'll be able to take out the invalid and poor quality articles. So with the peer review process, we can strengthen the validity, the quality, and the originality of articles for publication. Because we have actually crimes in academic publishing. In fact, we have issues about plagiarism. We have issues about predatory journal publications. And we don't want to belong to those things because it will actually destroy our academic reputation. Meaning, what we have promised to deliver to our scientific community with our research outputs. So the peer review process, it depends on which journal is research output, which journal research output was submitted. So the peer review process usually undergoes through an editor's decision whether to accept or not to accept. The automatic acceptance of an editor means that the research article will go through a peer review process, and that means these are external reviewers that are invited by the editor to look into the papers. And then the review findings of the articles will be your basis in improving further your research article, and the peer review findings, however, can be also the basis of considering your research output to proceed to the next steps in publication process or to be rejected eventually. So the peer review process usually undergoes through this. So there are external reviewers who will be invited, and the external reviewers will say yes or no to the invitation. Once they say yes, they will be given access to articles that will be helpful in verifying your results, access to articles that will be helpful in examining your research outputs, especially the articles that are being cited, and they have to be checked whether they are genuine or you are just citing for the sake of citing or for the sake of using something to cite in your research article. So those are some things that the external evaluators or external reviewers or the peer reviewers will be looking at. And then how important really is your research, that will be assessed as well by the reviews. Once the reviewers will say your work needs major revision or minor revision, then your editor will get back to you with the suggestion of improving your research outputs following the review findings, because the reviewers find your article important but needs to be improved. So whether in minor terms or in major terms. Once you are able to meet the comments of the reviewers and there are no further advices to improve your paper or your submitted research output will go to the production process and then eventually to the publication. So this process is a bit rigid, no? Especially that the external evaluators or external reviewers do not know. Sometimes single double blind or single blind review. When we say double blind, that means the authors do not know who review their papers and the reviewers also do not know whose output they are reviewing. Sometimes single blind, that means the authors do not know who review their papers, but the reviewers know whose output they are reviewing. So especially that is very common among those journals that have already reached the level in which they are already very much respected. So that's some processes that the submitted research output undergoes. So there are types of scientific publications to be reviewed, no? So when we say peer-reviewed or refereed, in other words, these articles are subjected to the evaluation of multiple experts, no? Multiple experts following the procedure that I had shown to you. So sometimes like that. So what are these scientific publications that needs to be peer-reviewed? First is the research articles. These are very common. Our articles that are submitted as output, final output of our research. And they are called original articles or original research articles. So these are very common. Then we have literature reviews, the systematic literature reviews, quantitative systematic literature reviews. These are also some scientific publications that need to be peer-reviewed, and some are columns. However, when you use news in your scientific articles, they need to be also looked at. Book reviews, once published, they need also peer-reviewed, annotated bibliographies, and then literary review. So these are some of the outputs that need to be peer-reviewed. Then what information is not peer-reviewed? Government agencies, they are not peer-reviewed. In other words, you have to be keen in the selection of sources of your information from government agencies, because whatever reports that they are going to produce, they are not peer-reviewed. Okay. So for instance, once you need some statistics or statistical information to be put into your paper, please choose the statistical authority of your country. In my case, in the Philippines, we have to choose the Philippine Statistics Authority. Then conference proceedings, sometimes they are not peer reviewed, or the peer reviewed is quite light. So that's why when we include some conference proceedings, we have to be keen in using this in these publications in our research outputs. Dissertations, although they are made by doctoral candidates, and sometimes they are reviewed by some external evaluators, sometimes they are only reviewed by their advisory committees, so not much in peer review. So peer review, what must be examined and what must be reviewed. So the peer review is for actually not to turn down our papers. So it's not towards that, towards the rejection of papers, but to increase the chance of success. Okay, the chance of success for our paper to be accepted, and also the chance of coming up for the publisher, the chance of coming up with quality publications. So the author must ensure that the paper complies with the journal guidelines before submission. So first things first, before the peer review, once you are at the stage of submitting your research articles or publication, you have to take note of the scope and aims of the journal publisher, and make sure that they submit, the research output that needs to be submitted for publication complies all the requirements of the academic publisher. So you have to look into the journal of your choice, look into the scope and aims, and make sure that your submitted article or your article for publication actually falls within the range that the journal publishes in terms of disciplines, in terms of thematic areas. So, and this is also a caveat or a reminder for all authors that we have to be open to criticisms, and we have to be open to suggested revisions and learn from our mistakes through the peer review process. So what must be reviewed? First is the title. We have to look into the title. If the title contains or already represents what is produced in terms of information by the paper, okay? It should include the concept and the organism being investigated if it is a biological study, or it also has to be able to integrate the scope of the study, the systems used in the study, because the title is the summary of the summaries in the study. So the peer review assesses whether the abstract is sufficiently informative, because this abstract is a summary of our paper, and it has a word limit. So we cannot just say that the summary is as long as 500, because that's still short for me. No, sometimes the journal publishers tell us that we have to abide by the word limit of 200, 250 to 300 words for our abstract. And then the abstract must be informative. what is to be expected from the paper is what the abstract must contain. Then the peer reviewer determines whether the introduction provides sufficient background. So you have to look at the introduction. You have to look at actually the logical organization of the paper. And that means the research topic, how the research question is presented, and what are the hypotheses in the paper. Then the peer reviewer must also look at the methods. Are they standard methods, or are they methods that are modified? And if the methods are modified, why are these methods modified? No, so, and if the if the methods are already appropriate or sufficient to answer the research question, or the information requirement of the research question, or the testing requirement of the research question. So it is the peer reviewer's job to identify what is missing in the method section. Actually, what is missing in the entire paper. The peer reviewer also has to look at the results, no? You have to look at the results as well. And are they able to provide the sufficient detail? Because there are details, but not too detailed. But are they the sufficient details? What are being written in the paper? Are they already sufficient? And are they credible? So are they believable? No, because the scientific publication, once shared, will have to be believed in. And then the peer reviewer determines whether the discussion is clear and focused, because we have to take note that the English that we have to use is technical, following the technical writing style. No, so it's not any English that we want. We have to look at the kind of English that many people, a lot of people can actually understand. Why we have to publish in technical writing, or why we have to prepare our research outputs in technical writing style? Because many people should be informed and should have understanding of the words that we put in our paper. So it's not any kind of English that must be put in our paper.
Dr. Raquel, probably
Yes.
this is, sorry to interrupt, but probably this is very interesting about the language of English. As far as I know, there are two types of English that we need to be constant. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes they would like to have whether it is British or American style, which is sometimes is very confusing for me. I mean, do you mind to further elaborate? Yeah, what do you think about it? Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. That's a very good question. It actually depends on your choice of journal, because not all journals follow or adopt the American English. Some are into British English, and some are into American English. So you have to look at the journal. So sometimes they say in the description of the journal that the English that is being used by the journal is American and sometimes British. But based on my experience, what is actually pervasive, meaning widely used, is American English. Because that is where most people have so much knowledge about the English words in terms of use and in terms of understanding. So it's usually American English. Just very seldom are into British English, but I know that the academic publishing companies from UK and from Europe, they usually accept British English. So actually, you have to look at the journal because it's the journal academic publisher that can tell you whether the English that you are using is acceptable or not. But most is into the style of writing, that the style of writing must be no frills and laces. What I mean by no frills and laces, you are not you are not literary. You are just direct to the point, straightforward, simple, but not dull, but not boring. Okay, so that's the style. The technical writing style actually captures the suggested style in the preparation of our paper for publication.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Thank you for your question. And so so here the peer reviewer must be able to determine if the discussion is clear. So that is also the job of the peer reviewer. It will also have to look into the discussion, whether clear and focused and well arranged in terms of logic. No, and the conclusions are really the ones that are answering the hypothesis of the research paper or of the research output, and are really possessing the interpretation, the right interpretation of the results. It's also the job of the peer reviewer to look into the references that are being used, okay? Because sometimes when we write our research outputs, because of the time, we don't have the luxury of time, the time that we need to finish our output, we just put our references, even if not the appropriate ones. So the peer reviewer will have also to look into the references, whether those are really the right references for the inline citations or the cited quotes or the cited lines. And then the last one is about the writing style, which is clearly written and the content seems logical. So logical organization is very, very important in research output. And that is one of the aspects that the peer reviewer is going to look at. And so how peer review evaluates manuscript? First is it looks into the validity of the science, whether valid or not valid is your research question, valid or not valid is your research process, and then the quality of the experimental design, especially that we have to address internal validity and external validity. So methods-wise, that is accepted. External validity, if we can be able to generalize, if our findings is good to be able to generalize a particular, a bigger group or a bigger area. So that one is very important. And then the appropriateness of the methods, those are the things first that are being looked at by a reviewer. Then after that one, is the research important? If it makes sense at this point in time. If it does not make sense, and sometimes it's just for the sake of doing research, or it's just for the sake of publishing research, then the reviewer will not probably give you the support. And the importance of the research, the importance of the findings, and whether it will advance the field, and whether your output is original or not original. So at this point in time, we have already some softwares that can help us in making sure that our outputs are really original. So in terms of plagiarism, we have already some softwares that do plagiarism check. So it will, after that one, the reviewers will look at the scientific errors, and references that are missing or incorrect. So part of the scientific errors here are the grammar errors, because the grammar errors, once committed, sometimes they twist the understanding, they twist the message. So that is part of the job of the reviewer to look at those errors. The scientific errors also include our interpretation of especially the significance between means. Okay. Once we do not know how to do that, we might commit scientific errors. And then once we quote something that is not correct, so the reviewers will look at those things. So that's why the reviewers are given the access for 1 month to the articles that are stored in the database for references. So example, when you are reviewing a particular research output that is submitted in a Scopus index journal, in the process of the review, you are actually given 1 month access to the Scopus journals for you to use and to verify that your findings about the submitted research output. And then, of course, the grammatical errors, that is least important, especially the typographical errors. So how are we going to write our review? No, we have to take note that this is a peer review process. When we say peer review, then that means that they are our colleagues in the field, whether they are part of our universities or part of our country or whatever is the international organization or whatever is the local organization. They are our colleagues. In other words, they are our friends. And in our society as economists, for instance, we do not turn down each other. So that's why we have this peer review process. Okay. So in writing our peer review, as much as possible, let's be constructive. Okay. Let's be constructive because comments really, it depends on the person receiving the comments, how he or she reacts to the comments. So we have to be a bit sensitive to that. Especially in Asia, we are very much sensitive to comments in our culture, no? So we
I think
always,
very much.
yes, we always have to think of the ones receiving our comments when we write our review findings. We will not just point out on the negative things that we found in the paper. We have to do something to make it really constructive. So when you do your peer review findings, you have to outline. And the outline is also going to follow the outline of our research article that we review. Example, there is a title, there is abstract, there is introduction, there is a method section, there is discussion of the results. We have also to outline, okay? And then we can also give general feedback. So sometimes we can do the inverted pyramid. It depends on you, what works in you. If it is inverted pyramid, when we say inverted pyramid, it's from the specific to the general. No, it's from the general to the specific. But sometimes there are people who like the specific to general. So it depends on your orientation. But having this inverted pyramid, so that means what are the most important information? No, okay. So let me go back to some slides. So let me go back to this. So these are very important. So you will write this in the summary. You will highlight this actually most important things for the review findings to the least important. So that is what is meant by this outline. So you summarize the research you summarize your findings based on the research and your overall impression. So having first the most important things, that means look at the validity in terms of how valid the research output is at this point in time, quality of the experimental design, and the appropriateness of the method. So you do something like that up to the minor issues and the miscellaneous remarks. That means the typo errors, the grammatical errors, you are going to give findings. So the major issues consist of the essential points the authors need to address before the manuscript can proceed. So it has something to do with what's the core really of the study. You have to strengthen the core of the study. So you have to provide some suggestions that will help the authors of the submitted articles to really improve the core or the backbone or the essential part of its study. So what's really the study about? So you have to look at what's the validity, what's the appropriateness in terms of methods, and in terms of the presentation, you can actually give feedbacks on those things. Then the minor issues like spelling, grammar, phrasing issues, and then data presentation, you can actually present feedback on those things. So other points, you can give your overall impression on the paper. Let's say if you think the paper is really very necessary, and if you have if there is something that you can highlight in your feedback, like for instance what it can advance, so what the paper can help in advancing, like how important is the paper. So yesterday I reviewed a paper that was submitted in Springer Nature, and it was quite at first glance it was quite very simple paper. It talks about cultural sensitivity, but then later on when you realize from the abstract, it makes you realize that cultural sensitivity is an important aspect that you have to discuss, especially when you want countries and people in different countries and in different cultures to learn from each other. So that's what I really admire in that research output, and I put that in my review findings. Okay, so you have to write your review findings in a way that will not be hurtful to the people who are going to look at the paper back for improvement. So that's my message. So there are do's and don'ts. Do justify the recommendation. Of course, be specific in giving feedback, be thorough, be professional, and of course, respectful, because you don't know your output will also be subjected to the same peer review process, and you might be hit back. And then remember to say what you like about the manuscript. What you like about the manuscript. That's also very important. Don'ts. Do not recommend additional experiments or unnecessary elements. That is already a finished process. That is already a final result. You don't have to do again additional experiments, and please don't recommend additional experiments that might be used in other aspects or in the sequel or the next or follow-up study. Tell the authors exactly how to revise their manuscript. Do not just say, revise your manuscript. cannot just say like that. You have to be specific. So how to exactly revise their manuscript, how they should arrange their logic. In other words, you have to help them. Then use the review to promote your own research or hypothesis. You can make them alert, or the researchers are submitting the output for publication. You can make them alert of your work because you are a peer. Okay, you are a peer of those people who have prepared the output for publication. Focus on typos and grammar. Do not focus, do not do not use that as something that will highlight the grammatical errors. By the way, I have also to remind you that in promoting your research or hypothesis, you still have to honor or respect the decision of the ones publishing. Then submit your review without proofreading it and checking everything one more time. You have to do it. You have to review your review findings, in other words. So that is all for that part. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much for addressing for the first session. It's really interesting. I mean, that's because for the last 4 years, I'm working with how to publish a journal, but now we try to become a reviewer as well. So I try to stimulate all the participants actually. Is there any questions that you would like to address? I try to check on the chat box. There's nothing yet. Or probably is there anyone would like to raise your hand, or please open your microphone? Or is there anyone, please? Probably not yet. If not yet, is that okay if me myself try to ask questions? So what I found, there is a, please correct me if I'm wrong. You mentioned there are some types of the what is it, paper that we can submit, and I found you mentioned there are two things that I cannot really understand the difference between literary review and the literature review. So I have experience in publishing literature review, but I don't understand about the literary review. Is there any significant difference between two?
Actually, when it comes to I'm not also, I don't have experience in the literary review, more on the communications fields, in the arts fields probably. But literary, in terms of scientific publication, not much, but when it comes to language, they usually do it. They usually have literary reviews. So that is acceptable, but probably in our case, in the field of economics, not into that, but we are into literature review. In some other fields, they have.
Oh, I see. So it's more like because I'm particularly in agribusiness, that's why I don't understand about the literary things, but thank you very much. Yeah, so let me see whether is there any other questions.
In the arts field, they have actually in the arts field, especially in the communication, yes.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, now I found this is from Mr. Ihsanuddin. A question is about, could you give some tricks to find about novelty in paper? Yeah, I guess this is very important questions, please.
This is quite a hard question, but you know what? In the novelty of the paper, you can actually emphasize on what more information should be added in the current discussion. Because every time there are always changes. No, there are always changes, and just a sort of contribution to answer an information gap. When we say an information gap, we do not know what must be added in order for us to be able to comprehensively understand. Okay, so that's one thing that can assure what you are going to do is novel. But there is actually no trick to it. How to find novelty in paper? Because you have to always do the literature review in order to find out whether that paper is novel or not novel. Yes.
So it's basically depends as a reviewer points of view. It means that we have to be clear about those what the author
Yeah.
in the literature review, and then we decide whether what is the novelty or is that what you say?
Yeah, you have as a reviewer, as a peer reviewer, you have actually the responsibility of keeping ourselves updated about the field. But we cannot be able to do that with all the functions that we do, with all the assignments that we do. That's why every time there is an invitation to review, if you say yes to that invitation, Scopus will give you, if that is a Scopus index journal, for instance, Scopus will give you the access for 30 days to be able to look into what had been published over the past 5 years, the past 3 years, and at this time around. So there is still this, the peer review process is not as easy as looking at what are wrong in the paper or what you think are not nice about the paper, but the reviewer will have to be very specific, will have to be very scientific in his or her comments because he or she has to do the review process through the access of the Scopus journals, for instance.
Yeah, agree. I think that's being updated in our specific area is very much important, especially as a lecturer or reviewer. Otherwise, we can't really tell whether it's novelty or not. Yeah, that's really amazing. I think we still have 10 more minutes for a question and answer if anyone would like. Oh, Mr. Andre, this will be very nice. Please open your microphones and feel free to.
Okay, thank you to Ratna, Raquel.
Yes, hello.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
by your experience, how to give advice to the author, especially in international contextualization of the article. For example, like that, if someone write about beef cattle in East Java, I think it is already proper in terms of what we call context and etc. But if someone only write beef cattle in East Java, I think it could not be interesting for our readers in other countries. So, as an international reviewer, how to give advice to the author to make this article more interesting for the reader in other countries? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
yes. Yeah. I still go back to the literature review. I still go back to the literature review because once you do the literature review process, okay, for me, if I'm the one writing the scientific article, I usually go through the literature review process and look into the context, look into the specific context, like how to make my research paper relevant, even if I'm just writing about beef cattle in the Philippines. How can I make it still relevant if I'm going to produce this paper and submit this to an international journal? Is that the context? Yeah. I still go through the literature review process. That's why I I do not compromise the literature review process. I always look at the literature review process to make sure what I am writing about is relevant. It's still important, and it's going to be within the scope or within the context. It's still correct, because once you do the literature review process properly, you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot how to position the paper, position the paper. You cannot just say, I'm going to do this paper in this way. But when you do the literature review process, sometimes you can say, oh, what I am writing is actually not right, not anymore the kind that is being talked about at this point. So you have to change it. You have to change it. Like really change it 360 degrees. Okay, so you don't compromise. Always do the literature review process right. I always look at the literature review process. So that's why once I know this is what I learned from the literature review process, I have now the confidence to write. This is the context. This is what is relevant at this point for my research output. So that's why the peer reviewers, once they look at my research outputs, they have their own context, but then my context is still there and they can still say this is relevant. Yes. So always look at the literature review, because you can connect from the published articles to the review process.
Is that enough, Mr. Andre?
Thank
or
you.
Another
Thank you, Raquel.
questions? Okay.
No worries. You're
Yeah, very
welcome,
interesting.
Andre.
Probably I will just, so the key part is probably in the literature review to see, to connect the concept and the context very well.
I mean, based on my experience, I do that often. I do that always.
No, that's agree. I agree with that. Probably one more questions. We have more 6 minutes. If anyone would like to have another question, please. I will try to check. Who else would like to have another questions, or should we proceed with the next sessions? If not, I will just wait for a couple 1 minute. So probably Mr. Ihsan, Mr. Slamet, another questions? Oh, okay, I'll try in the chat. No one, not yet. Probably they will try to save for the next sessions. Do you mind, Raquel, Dr. Raquel, if we would like to proceed with the next session?
I wish to, but can we have a short toilet break? Like,
oh, sure, please. Sure, please. I'm really sorry for that.
No worries, no
have a
worries.
break. Yeah, we will return after this, please.
Yeah,
we will return after this.
3 minutes.
Sure, no, you take your time. No worries. We'll be waiting for you.
Yes, thank you. I have to.
Yeah. If anyone would like to have another questions that probably that you would like to write down, even though we will already move to the next sessions, you can please write down on the chat features, and probably I will welcome you to fill the link for the attendee link. Miss Novi, can you already do that? Mrs. Novi, I think she said it's done. Oh, okay. So I will come back to you soon in around 3 or 4 minutes later.
Hello, thank you very much for waiting. Yes, there's a hand that is raised. Okay, I will proceed. Yes. Hello, sir.
Yes, Ibu Raquel.
Yeah, your hand is raised.
Yes. I will follow that. My question.
Yeah.
How about? Is it true that different place can be included in the novelty?
The place, the difference in
Different
the area,
differences. Yes, different area in research can be included into novelty.
Yes. If that is necessary in that area, and in that area, that kind of research is not yet being conducted. But we have to be very, very sensitive when it comes to the similarities of our area to other areas. Example, if there is an Indonesian area, but this Indonesian area in characteristics are like, it's like an area in the Philippines where in the Philippines that study was conducted. Okay. We have to be a bit how to say this. We have to be a bit artistic in our presentation. Why we have to conduct it? Why you have to conduct your research in your area? Okay. It's probably you have to position it in a way where it's necessary that the information that you get from your research will develop this and that, and the Philippine findings will not be probably applicable in your area because of some cultural issues, something like that. So you have to give a sort of justification why you do something that has been done in one area to your area. Okay. So because we have, even if we have similar characteristics in our areas, especially, but then we have cultural differences. And we have also political differences. So that might be the reason why the Philippine condition will not work in your condition. So those are some things. You have to justify, not necessarily being novel, but you just have to justify the importance of doing that research in your area.
Okay, thank you, Ibu.
Yes, thank you very much. So I will proceed now to the next.
Yes, please. Sorry, I was just leave after I realized that I did a toilet break as well. Just
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
So Dr.
that's
Raquel,
one.
yes, I would like to ask you for the next presentation, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this is about the journal article writing workshop. This was the one prepared. So what type of journal peer review, or types of journal peer review process? Why do we need to consider ourselves as reviewers? And paths to becoming a reviewer. What does peer reviewing do for this outline? So we have again to take note that the journal peer review process are of types. Now it depends on our orientation in terms of brought about by our discipline. So that's why I remember the literary review versus the literature review. And that is part of the peer review process differences. No, literary review will be a bit different from the literature review. especially that there are some language used or words used that are allowed in the literature review, but not allowed in the literary review. So a peer review, as what we've learned, is a critical step actually in the publication process, because right now I think across the world, without the peer review process, our publication may come out, but quite questionable. Okay, so it's only unless it's only when the peer review process is done that we can say that our publication, once accepted, our publications will be dependable or will be reliable in terms of quality. So there are publications that have unique peer review process. So, and we have to take note that the peer review process changed over time. Like say, for instance, before there was no access to Scopus index journals, but now we can access Scopus journals once we review a submitted article to a Scopus index journal publisher. So there is what we call the single blind review, as what I said. The reviewer can know the author, but the author cannot know the reviewer. So that is one thing. Usually, this is common, but usually you can be able to figure this out as much more related to a journal publisher that publishes journals that are already coming from people who have been publishing on a particular topic or on a particular thematic area. Usually it's like that. So the highlights of the single blind review is reviewer anonymity allows for impartial decisions. So the reviewers will not be influenced by the authors, okay? And the authors may be concerned that reviewers in their field could delay publication, giving the reviewers a chance to publish first. That one might not be good, but that one can happen actually. There is already one incident in our university that one already happens, and because of the single blind review process. The reviewers may use their anonymity as justification for being unnecessarily critical or harsh when commenting on the author's work. So this one is also a good review process for the reviewers, because if they have that kind of attitude to be critical or harsh to the authors, they can do so without the author's knowledge, or without the authors being able to know who their harsh reviewers are. But for the double-blind review, both reviewers and authors do not know each other. So they do not know each other. The reviewer and the author are anonymous, and then the journal editor does not reveal the reviewer's credentials to the authors. And then both parties are not aware of each other's identity, and all identity indicators, especially affiliations, are being removed. So these are the highlights of a double-blind review process. The author anonymity prevents any reviewer bias. So there will be no biases, no, except not like the single blind review process, wherein the reviewer will be also influenced by what the authors have been able to do in in their respective areas or discipline or specialization, fields of specialization. But here in the double-blind review, we cannot be able to do it because both authors and reviewers do not know each other. There will be no revelations about their names and about their affiliations, especially about their backgrounds. So the articles written by prestigious or renowned authors are considered on the basis of the content of their papers rather than their reputation. So because there are, even if you are already a prestigious author, even if you're already a popular author, it's not always that you produce sensible journals or quality journals or quality outputs. So that's why articles that are written by these authors will not be able to be influenced by the reputation when it comes to the review because of the double-blind review process. Then reviewers can often identify the author through their writing style, subject matter, or self-citation. So they can actually, only through those things that the reviewers can be able to do so. Then more information for authors can be found in our double-blind peer review guidelines, actually. Open review, meaning both reviewers and authors know each other. So you know, if you are the one submitting a particular research output, you know who your reviewers are, and then the reviewers also know you in return. However, sometimes this is quite abused because this somehow the open review somehow results to I'll scratch your back and then you'll scratch my back. So I'll along that line, no? I'll scratch your back, but you have also to scratch mine. So it's like that. In other words,
Scratching back each other.
yes, doing some favors to each other. That's very, very common with the open review. But however, there are many people who believe that that is the best way of preventing malicious comments, of stopping plagiarism, and of preventing reviewers from having their agenda, or especially in pirating some works, and will encourage open, honest review. And others say open review as a less honest process, but because of fear of retribution, they can actually withhold their criticisms. So that's the plus and minus also of open review. Collaborative reviews. There are also what we see as collaborative reviews. So this is very common for journals because in one paper, there are many reviewers that will look into the paper. But they are also, the review process is also independently done. So that's what is meant by collaborative review. Okay. The reviewers' identities, especially when concealed from the authors. Now, the good thing with having the collaborative review is we'll be collecting different perspectives about the research output. So we can have the balance. Usually, the journal publishers employ 3 collaborative reviewers, actually. But the collaborative reviewers themselves, sometimes they do not know each other. Sometimes they know each other. Especially in one university, there are 2 of them that are being invited, but many times not invited. So what's good with the collaborative review process is will be more the review process of the paper will be more constructive and less restrictive because there are different perspectives that are being collected through the collaborative review. And then there's a risk of losing the benefit of having two or more independent evaluations. So with, let's say, for instance, 3 reviewers, and if the 2 reviewers are saying yes to your output to be further improved, and 1 reviewer is going to be saying no to the publication of your output, the 2 reviewers who support for the improvement of your output will be able to subdue the last reviewer or the 3rd reviewer that says no to your output. So that is a good attribute of collaborative review. So also creates the risk of blurring the distinction. Sometimes that will happen, that the distinction of authoring and appraisal will be somehow compromised, but not often. There is also a post-publication peer review, and sometimes this one is also publishable. So we have comments. There are publishable comments of some articles, no? So that's part of the post-publication peer review. So there are highlights of the post-publication peer review. One is it reflects the evolving nature of the knowledge. So because there are some comments that says this one is not doing an addition to knowledge, this one is doing some additions to knowledge in this particular aspects. So you can be able to really see where are the points of evolution of the knowledge in that particular discipline. It gives the opportunity for papers to be corrected or improved, and it also is going to have revising papers after publication incompatible with the notion of the version of record, and shortcomings and errors within published material have traditionally been addressed through corrections and errata. So this one, because of the post-publication review, we can actually have a follow-up errata if ever we have some comments or some things that we need to address because there are some errors probably, or some comments that are saying something that we can actually address. So that is one good thing with a post-publication review. Then we have the triple blind peer review. So the editor, the reviewer do not know you, and the author as well. So they do not know your affiliation and your institution. And this actually can produce honest reviews, very, very honest reviews because of the triple blind peer review. But this usually does not happen because the editor can know usually those who submit their papers for publication. So I do not know, I could not be able yet to pinpoint the journal publishers that will not require the authors' names to be declared upon the submission of output. So there are highlights of triple blind peer review. So reviewers and handling editors are not biased by the identity of the authors because they do not know. So, and then the evaluated articles are solely based on scientific importance. So more objective is the process of the peer review. And then you'll be able to understand the difference of the triple blind peer review as opposed to other peer review process. So more transparent peer review, and there are highlights of this, acknowledges the important role of the reviewers and enriches published articles and improves the reading experience. So the reviewers play actually a vital role in academic publishing, and their contributions by the time the research outputs come out usually are not reflected on the reviewed articles. So if you've been able to submit outputs in MPDI, MPDI is an open access journal publisher in Basel, Switzerland. You can be able to really know who review actually your articles. So MPDI acknowledges the contributions of the reviewers through reflecting their names as academic reviewers by the time your output already goes online or already is accepted. So, but during the time wherein your research articles are being reviewed, MPDI will not let you know. So that's the guidelines in MPDI. So we have third-party review, and then we have also cascading review. So in cascading peer review, when a manuscript is rejected after review, it is being considered low priority in journal publication. And we can now be able to go into another journal. So this happens to me one time, this cascading peer review, when I submitted a research output to a particular Elsevier journal, and it seems that the first journal that I choose is something that is not publishing the kind of thematic area that I'm into, although it is about the same discipline, about forestry during that time. But instead of rejecting my work, that journal actually refers me to another journal, to a sister journal. And that is when the peer review that is cascading peer review process was actually applied. So the same people who they appointed to review my work were reassigned to my work in another journal. A third-party peer review is really another party that will look into your paper, but that is not very much common. Okay. So why do you need to consider yourself being a reviewer? First is we do our research. We learn from our experience in research. We learn also from our experience in reading research articles from other researchers, no? So it is actually a responsibility for us as researchers and as also users of research outputs of other researchers to give service to those researchers who are looking for objective peer review process. And that is where we have to consider ourselves as a reviewer. So we can actually learn a lot from our peer review process. And but as a reviewer yourself, you have also to equip yourselves of the necessary knowledge, of the necessary skills. So who can become a reviewer? Actually, anyone who is an expert in the research field can be a reviewer. And we just need to have in-depth expertise. We just need to have knowledge We just need to have experience, and we just need to have attitude, the right attitude. Okay, because we need to come up with constructive criticisms as reviewers. So paths to becoming a reviewer. First is asking a colleague, okay, who already reviews for a journal to recommend you. That can be one. So, but however, you don't have to ask your colleagues. If your colleagues find you really a suitable reviewer for a research output, I know that colleague of yours will recommend you. So when you say suitable, that means you have really the needed training, you really have the experience, you really have the knowledge, and you really have the right attitude to review, then that actually can make your colleague recommend you. Networking, that's why in academic publishing, in the journals, okay, and the academic publishing companies keep databases of who are the ones publishing their outputs in those journals, and they usually use those researchers to review the works of researchers who submit their research outputs for publication in those journals. And then becoming also a member of a learned society and networks, our academic networks. Now, as economists, we have some networks, and also being members of fellowship communities, of scholarship organizations. So that can actually help us in contacting journals directly to inquire about potential reviewers. Then if you have mentors, okay, some of us do postdocs. Some of us also have mentors not in our universities, not also in our countries. So our networks, our connections with them usually make us potential reviewers of research outputs. So that is very common to me every year. I have my research supervisor at the University of Queensland who often pushes me to review research outputs submitted to the journals of, let's say, the circular economy and sustainability, where he sits as an associate editor.
Sorry, can I ask you questions? Sorry,
Yes,
before
okay.
I forgot.
No worries.
So I have an experience as like this. When we send into a journal, and then there are some journal who really provide a platform where you can put some recommendations on the reviewers that you would like to put on. For example, we put 3
Yes.
or 4 names. So in that case, is it, I don't know, in terms of ethic, do you mind to tell us, right, is it polite? Is it ethically correct if, for example, I submit a paper into a certain journal, and after that, I propose some of my friends in Indonesia, for example, my colleague who I really, for example, Mr. Andre or Mr. Slamet or Mr. or whatever it is, and then I put them as recommendations as reviewer. Is that ethically okay or not?
There are actually journal publishers that allow you to do that, but there are also a lot of journal publishers that will not allow you to do that. So they have, because the journal publishers who do not require you to to recommend, they have already their potential reviewers from their databases. But if you can actually do that whenever you can justify why you choose your colleagues, because there are publishers that require you to name your reviewers, your potential reviewers. But each recommendation will actually require you to put a certain justification why that reviewer. Because if you cannot do convincing justification for that reviewer, usually the journal publisher will not will require you to put another name. But it's okay as long as you can justify, because the choice of the choice
yeah.
of our reviewers must be based on the topic that we are writing about, and then must be knowledgeable about the topic and experience also about the topic that we are writing about. So that's actually no problem if ever you can provide convincing justification.
Sorry, probably if I would like to take the opposite point of view from if we are in the journal and then we see some author who would like to recommend their friends. So ethically, it's fine, isn't it? As long as they can provide justifications on it. Oh, okay, cool.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Especially if they are their peers, if they are their peers. But then it's good to choose people who do not know about the authors, because you know the biases will get into the process. If the
Agree, yeah.
reviewers know the authors and they are their friends, they become, you know, they become they consider their friends' feelings whenever they write their comments. So, but if your journal is double blind, that will be okay. I think that will be okay. Because even if you name your friends as the journal reviewers, and then the double blind peer review is the process, and it's possible that the articles that is submitted is not going to be assigned to your friends, but to other people. Because there is this database that is actually kept, and they choose among those people who will be available to review the submitted research output. So those three, usually the three recommendations or two recommendations of reviewers are actually to add to the database, because many of the people who can potentially review your research output are not available all the time. The requests are made for the review. So at least they have some, how do you call this, some other alternatives to call on for the review. Yes. But ethically, we will just have to be keen about the ethics in research. So as long as you do not know, you don't do something that is unethical, then that's okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
No worries, no worries. So moving on, what does peer reviewing do? I think we have already answered this one. For our discipline, it can actually boost our scientific community. In other words, more attention, more funding, more opportunities, and more collaborations for everyone. So it can help. And our research, it can also be able to help us, because other reviewers can tell us more about subject knowledge, research methods, innovative approaches, critical thinking, and problem solving. So those things that we probably miss while we were doing our research process for our outputs, we probably miss some of those things. Then through the review process, we can learn, this should have been done. Okay? And then you can note those suggestions in your next or future projects. For your career, it's also good, even if peer review process in most journals are without service fees. They are actually given for free. It is a free service. Also, we don't pay our reviewers. We don't pay our reviewers. But then if you are a reviewer of a journal, you can put in your into your CV or into your resume that you have reviewed papers in these journal publishers. Okay, and that adds to your skills, to your experience, and also prestige. For our understanding, whenever our research outputs are reviewed, we will be able to be reminded of what we missed while we were doing our research outputs, so we can have deeper understanding actually. So it's due to the review findings of my articles that I was made more aware of the ethics in research, safety regulations, the research ethics, especially in getting consent, okay, in getting consent of the study subjects, in funding generation, what to put and what not to put in my research output. So those are the things that I have for that part about the review process. Any question?
Yeah, please. This is getting more interesting. I mean that we are getting deep down into what kinds of what types of reviewer are we. I was surprised there are a lot of types. I thought it's only just single blind and double blind review.
Double
That's all
blind,
that I
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any question, please, Mr. Slamet, probably, or sorry, it's just if anyone, please feel free if you want to your microphone on. Anyone, please?
Yes, Agus.
Oh yeah, here it is. Sorry, yeah, Mr. Agus, please.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Ratna.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you also.
Iya, lama.
Okay, Raquel. Okay, nice to meet you also after 12 years.
Yes, yeah.
I graduated in 2010, I think. So 12
Yeah,
years ago.
ahead
Yeah.
of me.
Okay. Usually in international reputable journal, they will ask for the originality or novelty
Yes,
and significance of contents.
yes.
In your opinion, when we as a reviewer, can we decide it only using the abstract, or maybe we just should read all of the article before decide, oh, it is original or it is not original, so we can doing further process.
Yeah,
Okay.
actually,
Thank you very much.
It's like this, yes, Agus. It's
Yeah.
like this. In submitting your research articles to a particular journal, you write the novelty about, or don't just think about the novelty as novelty. What's really the contribution? What's really new that is contributed to my to science by my project? Think of the novelty as the contribution of your research work, and you do that when you write the letter to the editor, right?
Yeah.
There is this particular letter that you are going to write along with your submitted output, and that is where you are going to say what is the contribution of my current research. So actually, the novelty there is the contribution of your current research. What is my research about? And why is it that it is relevant at this point in time? Why is it that it is important at this time? And how many have been studying about this subject? And why have you decided to study on this particular subject? And that's why you produce this particular research output. So you actually outline all of those things in the letter to the editor. Because when you submit your research output, it is not only about appending your research output and uploading your research output. You have also to upload your letter to the editor. So it's the cover letter. It's what we call the cover letter of the submitted research output. Because the novelty, I know the novelty of your research is already outlined, is already elaborated in your introduction, in your significance of the study, and even in the discussion of your results and up to the conclusion. So highlight the contribution of your current research in your letter to the editor.
Yeah, is that answering your question, Mr. Agus? Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. Cover
okay.
letter is basically like a teaser information to the editor about what we're doing and why our paper is really important that you need to accept, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there any other questions from the participants other than that? We still have more around 15 minutes. Mas Ivan, are you there? Or everyone, please, I welcome for any questions. If not, probably I will have another question just to stimulate the participants, if you don't mind. I don't know whether this is going to be this part of sessions or the next sessions. What makes me confused sometimes is when they say major revisions or minor revisions, and sometimes they can end up with the rejections. It really confused me. How do you really distinguish, yes, this is going to be the major revisions and the other one is going to be minor? How the reviewers see to distinguish both type of revisions?
Yes, there's really no particular distinction about major revision, how major is the revision or how minor is the revision. But it usually the reviewers, for my part, if I am going to recommend for a major revision, I would be thinking of what to be added to the paper and how the changes will be done on the paper. So if it means that you are going to add one more section or subdivide a very long section and into two sections and elaborate the second section by providing more information on this and that, it would be major revision. It would be major revision. But minor revision for me is like rearranging subtopics is just minor, as long as there is just very little or just a little addition to the current output, then that is okay with me. That's minor revision for me.
Basically, there is no special justifications to mention, yes, this is major or this is minor. It's subjective opinion.
Yes. Because there was one time where my output was reviewed and it was said major revision, and then when I look at the comments, sometimes I just justify, I just react to the comments. I don't necessarily touch my research output and put changes on my research output. So it has something to do with that. You don't have to always change your research output. You can rebut. You can rebut the comments, because by the time you are going to return your research output and also your response to the author's comments, you will have to provide a table with the the reviewer's comments and then actions taken by the authors. So you can actually rebut in there, argue, in other words. You can argue, put your rebuttal, say your argument respectfully, and sometimes you can explain further why you did not do it in that suggested way. So those are the things that will not necessarily change your research output so much. As long as it will warrant you or it will merit you to do those arguments and to do those elaborations. So you don't actually have to, but once you receive your comments, okay, from the reviewers, you have to look into each of the comments. You don't have to actually revise when not necessary. Sometimes you just have to explain why you are not doing it in the way that they suggested. So those things, something like that. So, and also, you can also ask the reviewers about certain things. If is it possible that you can put the revisions in this way in that in your research output. So what I'm saying is you have to look at your comments and determine which of the comments you need to address in your research output and which of the comments you need to just explain or to argue. So that's how you have to take the comments. So you have also, as an author, is you should also have the attitude of not becoming sensitive to the comments, because not many reviewers are also good in saying respectful things. But what they're saying is something about your output. They're not saying something about yourself. So those things, because some of the authors, they forget revising their manuscripts or revising their research outputs because they were already hurt by the comments of the reviewers. So you have to try to separate your being you and your manuscript so that you can go on with the revising of your manuscript based on the reviewer's suggestions or based on the reviewer's comments. So always remember that the reviewer's comments are about your manuscript or your research output, not about yourself. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I try to see how's the opposite way as a reviewer. So it means that this that I would like to highlight, probably what you say, the if we are as a reviewer is a really subjective opinion that we would like to take, whether yours is major and yours is minor, and it depends on you how you can respond. Yeah, but as an author, sometimes we need to process our emotions when we get those comments. Just take a day after and then we read again and then, okay, now I can see the points. Well, any other questions? I mean, that from everyone, please. And I can see there are more additional participants. Hooray, it's around 23. If you haven't filled the, I think Mrs. Novi already put it back. If you haven't put your attendee list, please, you can fill the link. And if you have any questions, please. If not, we will try to continue with probably the last sessions, isn't it? Yeah. Or anyone want to have a break before going to the next sessions? Probably I'll just wait. Is that okay, Dr. Raquel? I'm afraid that there are other people who would like to have questions.
Yeah.
I would be very happy as well if anyone need translations. And no? So, Dr. Raquel, do you want to have another break for a while, or what do you think? Do you need another break? I mean,
I think 3 minutes, 5 minutes is it okay?
Yeah, take your time, please. Yes.
Yeah,
take your time.
I will just make this ready.
Yeah. For anyone else, if you still have anything to ask, probably you can just write down there in the chat feature or probably we will go to the next sections in the next 5 minutes. If you want to have a toilet break, coffee. I will check down. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Murphy. Fill the attendee list. Please. Or anyone would like to sing a song, probably. There's no song feature.
Yes. Okay. I think it's good to just continue.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I think this is the last slide. I've actually prepared a short one of this containing just all the information. But when I look at the program, I was dissecting further the one presentation, dividing it into 3. So now we're in the instructions and tips for doing a correct review. So how to perform a peer review, the outline of this one, the overview of the review report, and then the first and the second reviews, how to structure your report on presentations and style, and then criticisms and confidential comments. Then we'll go to the recommendations and top tips for peer reviewers. So here, how to perform a peer review. We'll have to make sure that the abstract of the manuscript is supplied, is being provided, so that we can look at the abstract of the manuscript and look at the external and internal validity based on the information from the abstract, and also the important things to be looked at. So the ones that I I shared, I think in the first presentation. And then we need to avoid delays. If we are performing a peer review, we always are being made aware of the deadline in performing the peer review. And we have to always remember of the deadline so that we will be avoiding delays. We will not be causing any delay at all. And we have to try to reply for invites right away. Because if we say yes, if we say no, that is very important as reply to the invites to peer review, because our replies will actually be the basis of the editor to choose another one or to give you access to the Scopus journals or to some databases as helpful sources of information for the review. So it's also important that as a reviewer, we know our conflicts of interests. No? If we are working on the same field and if we become a competitor, potential competitor to the author, then we'll have to back off from the review. So the overview of the review report format, there are actually informal structure and there is also a formal structure. The formal structure is actually following the presentation that is an inverted pyramid. So we have to come up with the general impressions of the paper, and then we'll format also our specific review findings based on the most important to the least important aspects. So it's not just whatever is the structure. So that the authors can be able to note which part you are referring to. And sometimes the lines of the paper are numbered, so it's easy for you to cite the line number for your particular comments or suggestions. So what I'm saying here is I'm not using the word criticisms because I'm not fond of actually doing criticisms, whether that is for the published article and not a published article. I always use comments, constructive comments, because it's a way of conveying respect to the owners of the outputs, the authors of the outputs. So the first is read through. You have to read through the article. So read through the abstract and the rest of the research output. So you can do skim read. So you just go through the paper, because you don't get right away the contents of the paper at first. When you do your reading for the first time of the paper, you actually do not get right away. So because also of your other functions, of your other assignments, so divided attention. And so for the first read consideration, so what is the main question addressed by the research? Is it relevant or interesting? And how original is the topic? Here we go again. The originality of the topic, does it mean, what does it add to the subject area? So compared with other published materials. In other words, you think of the originality or novelty of your research output in terms of what it can contribute. Why is it? What is the information gap? And how your research output is able to address that gap. That's the novelty of the paper, or that's the novelty of the research output. So is the paper well written? So when we say well written, the subdivisions of the paper are all clear and the text clear and easy to read. So in other words, technical writing, because we need simple English in order for our output to be understood by people across the world. And then, are the conclusions consistent with the evidence and arguments presented? So in other words, you take note of the logical organization of the information written in the research output. Are they consistent? In other words, they adhere to the topic, the title, and all the rest is in coherence. So that is what is meant by that. So, and of course, when you do an evaluation in that case, that means you are trying to know whether the research output addresses the main question that is being posed. And you can see this in the title, up down to the conclusion. If the author is disagreeing significantly with the current academic consensus, do they have a substantial case? So what is that case? And if that case is being provided, or an explanation is being provided. So if the paper includes tables or figures, what do they add to the paper? In other words, what are the figures for, or what are the tables for? What if that is for the aesthetic value of the paper, that is not as that is actually not serving positively the paper. Actually, the tables and figures must be put in there because they have reasons. No, they facilitate, especially in knowing where the evidence is, what really is the evidence, and in looking at the evidence. So that is what is meant by that. So though they aid understanding, or are they superfluous? When you say superfluous, they are unnecessary, not necessary. So spotting potential major flaws. So you can actually, when you read through the paper, okay, even if you do skim read, you can actually know by experience that there are major problems, and you can highlight where the major problems are, so that it will be easy for you to get back and say something about the major problems that you have noted in the submitted output. So these are some examples of major flaws. So the use of discredited method, in other words, that is not anymore used, and why are you using it? So probably they have a good reason why they have used a discredited method. So they may have some explanations, but they have to provide the explanations clearly. And drawing a conclusion that is contradicted by the author's own statistical or qualitative evidences. This happens to me one time because I said something about competition, but then the results are saying a different thing. So I had to be reminded and corrected by the reviewer, but then I put an explanation why I say something about the competition and my results are saying different thing. So those are some ways in which you can actually provide explanations to the flaws being identified by the reviewers. Ignoring a process that is known to have a strong influence on the area under study. So this one is quite something, because when you say that a process has strong influence on the area under study, then that process must have been included when the research was done. So you have to, as a reviewer, you take note of this early on. And then if the experimental design features prominently in the paper, and then it first check that the methodology is sound, and if not, then you can point out as a major flaw. These major flaws, by the way, are very important to be pointed out when you read through the paper, because this will become your basis in saying whether that is a major revision or a minor revision. Okay, especially when with method, because the method is a section in your research paper. And if it is a process and a method that has been used by other researchers because of the strong influence of that process to a specific area or to a particular study, then that is part that must have been the choice of the method or part of the research to be explained in the research output and is not being explained. So that is one of the things that you can point out as major flaws. So methods usually they are the ones that provide the basis in saying that's a major flaw, that's not a major flaw. So in other words, when you have those major flaws, those are actually the reasons and provides the possibilities that your paper will be undergoing a major revision. So the major flaws in information, this is one thing. This can be ground as well that your paper may be rejected. If not rejected, will undergo a major revision because there is so much data that is necessary to be part of the research output and not seen in the current form of the research output. So insufficient data. Unclear data tables, that one, you need really so much work for the data tables to be understood or understandable. Contradictory data that are either not self-consistent or disagree with the conclusions, that one is you have to provide some explanations on that. and the explanation should be as comprehensive as possible so that your information will be, or the reviewer will be able to be guided properly. Confirmatory data, if not there, and then if little only, then you have to add some more. So that means you have to do major revision in the current form of the research output. So concluding the first reading, draft the first 2 paragraphs of your review following the format that was in the first presentation, that is following the inverted pyramid, and then from the most important to the least important aspects. And then make sure to include any major flaws you observe in your notes. And then if the journal has a specific reporting structure, the draft will still aid in the organization of your ideas. In other words, how the paper is structured, you can adapt that as a format for the organization of your ideas. So in the first paragraph, you can put in there the context of the research. You can say something about the context of the research, and you can also say about the key messages that need to be conveyed to the reader, and also the successful aspects of the paper, because this is going to not right away hurt the authors of the paper. Okay. Second paragraph is you can put in there about how interesting is the premise of the paper and important, and how the methods are appropriate, and the data, how are the data supporting the conclusions. You can say something about those things in the second paragraph. So rejection after the first reading, you have to be very sure if you are the reviewer of a paper wherein you plan of doing this rejection after the first reading, you have to be very, very careful about this. But it's again necessary to read fully the paper before doing this rejection decision for the author. So that's why if you're reviewing a paper and if you want to reject the paper at the first reading, then you have to revisit the site of the journal publisher and look into the section wherein there is this recommending rejection. So explanation of why or when to recommend rejection will tell you properly that you are right in your decision to reject the paper. So before starting the second read through, we have to benchmark for acceptance. So what is meant by that? When it comes to the contribution, to the potential contribution of the manuscript or the research output, you have to think about those matters, okay, as benchmark for acceptance. And the authors are advised to read really the scope and aims of the journal publishers, okay, of the particular journals, because that will check right away about your manuscript if it has a useful contribution to the knowledge base, or if it has really a potential contribution or novelty of your research output. So that is what is meant by that. So to save time and simplify the review, we can do these things. Don't rely solely upon inserting comments on the manuscript document, make separate notes. So when you actually read through the articles or the submitted article for your review in your computer, you can actually make notes. Okay, so you can post notes on particular aspects so that you can go back and check whether it's good to have this one as noted for error or revision. So that's one thing that I do actually when I read through the manuscripts. And I do not just read through the manuscript one time. So that's why, because the deadline is usually 24 days to 30 days. So I take time really digesting what the authors are trying to drive at with their research output. So in that particular case, I'm more empathetic. I'm more empathetic in a way that I tried to put myself into the shoes of the author so that I can understand what they are trying to drive at with their research output. So that's what I usually do as a reviewer. So try to group similar concerns or praise together. And if using a review program to note directly onto the manuscript, still try grouping the concerns and praise in separate notes. It helps actually later. It will remind you on what to put really in your review findings. The paragraph, the review findings in paragraph. And then note the line numbers of text upon which your notes are based, because there are line numbers, or I mean numbered lines. So you are going to take note of where the author of the research output can right away see your comments and how they can be able to possibly revise their revise that portion of the numbered lines, and also aids those reading your review. So that's the purpose of having the line numbers. And then keep images, graphs, and data tables in clear view, usually 600 dpi, right, Andrew? 600 dpi? Yeah, 600 dots per inch. So that's actually what is needed in, or better, in journal publication. So during the second read through, you should identify any place where the meaning is unclear or ambiguous, any factual errors, and any invalid arguments. And you can also consider this as guides. The following questions: does the title properly reflect the subject of the paper? Does the abstract provide an accessible summary of the paper? And do the keywords accurately reflect the content? Is the paper an appropriate length? Because you need to, again, go back to the scope and aims, because there are suggested lengths of the paper. So sometimes they say 6,000 words with spaces, or 15,000 words with spaces for systematic literature review. But for original research, you can have up to 6,000 to 7,000 words with spaces. So those things are actually specified in the scopes and aims, in the scope and aims, actually. So are the key messages short, accurate, and clear? So an introduction, it will help you look into the introduction. If it is well written or not well written. So it sets out an argument. Right away, it sets out an argument. What's wrong? What's the gap, and what is being addressed by my research for that gap? So it summarizes recent research related to the topic. So, and that also is going to tell us whether the author has really been extensive in doing literature review or not, because you can sense from the summarized portion a sense about the recent research being cited or being included. Then highlights the gaps in current understanding or conflicts in current knowledge, and establishes the originality of the research aims by demonstrating the need for investigations in the topic area. Aside from that, it gives a clear idea of the target readership, why the research was carried out, and the novelty and topicality of the manuscript. This is what I was always saying a while ago. So what's really the contribution? Why? What was being addressed? Okay. So originality and topicality. Okay, so originality and topicality can be established in the light of recent authoritative research. So it's impossible to argue that there is a conflict in current understanding by referencing articles that are 10 years old. So you have to extend it much later. Okay. And then you have to look at the aims as well. It's common for the introduction to end by stating the research aims, but then you have to also look into the aims of the research article, okay? Because it might be that it's not that convincing. You can make it more convincing by having a deeper, if it is, the aims will be judged according to depth, whether shallow or depth really are the aims. So the materials and methods, you will look at these things. Again, we are actually looking at these things. That's why in the materials and methods, we declare what is our process, what are the methods, what are the steps in our methods, and who are involved, how many are involved, then what statistical softwares, what was the experimentation about, what was the design. Because we need to consider that our research will encourage other researchers to look into the matter again and make another set of contribution. So we are going to look into the materials and methods for the potentials on replicability, repeatability, and robustness. And what is the best practice here? The robustness means what you've been able to come up with your analysis is really something that we can use in generalizing, in making conclusion. This must be done because that was what the results was saying. So that is what is meant by that. So under the materials and methods, we will look into whether the research can be replicable. In other words, if we can do it again in the same, following the same procedure and following the same pattern, can we do the research again? Because if it is not, then that is a very, very, very big issue with that research output, because the research output must have replicable terms in the conduct of research, then repeatable methods, and then up to the best practice. So when we say replicable research, this has something to do with what are the control experiments, how they set up the control experiments, what are the analysis, and can we be able to do repeated analysis? In other words, can we be able to rerun the analysis using the same method, using the same software, using the same models? Can we run our analysis over and over again and the same coefficients or the same results will come out? And repeated experiments, can we do the experiments ourselves? not only over and over again, but can we also replicate the experiments? And what is the sampling? Because the sampling is necessary, the size of the samples will tell us whether our results will be generalizable or not generalizable. Then the repeatable methods, this will provide us enough detail so that researchers will also be able to carry out the same research. In other words, they can do verification of our research. And they can also see something out of that verification, because what they will probably discover out of verification can be the novelty of their works. So that is one. Another thing is the robust research, and this is where we are going to make sure that the data that we are processing are really representative data, are really reliable. In other words, when we get them from the field, they are really reliable. What we are doing is we are getting as much as possible data that we can rely on for our analysis. So aside from that is our software, our models that we use. Okay, and then the sampling will also matter, because the sufficient data will also be because of the samples that we choose for our research. Then the best practice, what are the standard guidelines that are being followed? Okay, so the consort statement for reporting randomized trials. So what are these randomized trials? In other words, what have been declared from these randomized trials? And the health and safety of all participants in the study was not compromised, because these are part of the ethical standards that we are going to maintain. So if the research fails in those best practice, especially the ethical standards, that will be a ground for the rejection of the research output. And then the results and discussions, how are they prepared? How are they outlined? Are they projecting a coherent presentation? So when we say coherent presentation, this will be guided by the topic and how the topic is being described or being outlined in the title, from the title. Okay, so what happened, what was discovered, what was confirmed, these are very, very good discussions, part of the discussions and the results and discussion. So what you have to point out under the results and discussions is that the authors should be able to describe and discuss the overall story formed. And this means what are the inconsistencies and gaps being addressed, and what are the ways forward to be able to address, to sustain the efforts of addressing the gaps or inconsistencies. So here, these are some suggested patterns of good reporting to be followed by the author, that they should start by describing in simple terms what the data shows. So what the data show, what is expected from the table, and what is expected as explanation of the patterns observed in the table. So what should make the reference, they should make the reference to the statistical analysis, like putting in there the table 1, the table 2 in the discussion for reference purposes. And also, what is the significance or goodness of fit in the statistical analysis? So that is one thing. Once described, they should evaluate the trends, observe the patterns, in other words, the patterns of movements, either going up, going down, or status quo. Explain the significance of the results to wider understanding. So to be able to have a broadened understanding, we have to be able to discuss the observed patterns, okay, and the observed behavior, in other words. So that can also we can also refer to the published research to be able to affirm or strengthen our observation. The outcome should be a critical analysis of the data collected. So what had been observed about the data, what can probably be able to get us as insights from the data. For the conclusion, for this section, just a few paragraphs are actually going to summarize what had been addressed by the research output and how are these being addressed by the research output and what are the critical findings from the process. So that is what is in the conclusion. So if the conclusions here, if the conclusions are not evidence-based, then that can be a ground for rejection or major revision. So can be rewritten because the research must be evidence-based. So information gathered, the images, the graphs, and the data tables, they should be clear, okay? They should be clear and consistent also. So you should also check whether images have been edited or manipulated. So do not try to do this one because this can also be a good ground for the rejection of your submitted output. So do not manipulate. If the image should be that, because that is what the story is about in that image, then that image should be drawn in that way, okay? And if you're going to try to manipulate it, you have to put in there the main source of your manipulated or edited images, graphs, and tables. So provide modified from the source, modified from the works of this and that author, or the source of this is this and that authors. You have to always declare. So when the information, where the information is clear, you should check that the results seem plausible, also believable. In case there is an error in data gathering, as much as possible, check, recheck for errors, and also correct the errors, rectify when you have the chance to rectify before submission, before submitting the output. Then the trends you can see support the paper's discussion and conclusion, and the data are sufficient. So in the studies carried out over time, the data are sufficient to support the observed trends, for instance. So the list of references, they should be accurate, adequate, and balanced. Okay, so there is a way of doing or listing the references. There are some styles that are suggested by the academic publishers or prescribed by the academic publishers, usually APA, but some are into Vancouver, some are also into different style. So in terms of accuracy, you check, okay, the accuracy in terms of the information and the format of the reference, because that is very necessary. We have to always check and recheck our output, the accuracy of our output, especially the inline citations, because we need to inform, right, the readers of the potential readers of our work, okay? Because we need them to be informed, and so they have to believe in our work. So adequacy, we have to consider the parts of the argument, whether supported properly or not supported properly. Are there published studies that will support our arguments, or are there published studies that cannot support our argument, and under what conditions? We'll have to take note of those things. And then if a manuscript only uses half the citations typical in its field, then we have to look into what's the quality of these citations or cited articles, because it can be an indicator that the referencing should be improved, or the cited articles will have to be improved in number, although quantity is not always a reliable indicator. So that's why we have to look into the cited references if they are quality, reliable, because sometimes we do not need as many articles as we need. So references should be relevant, recent, and readily retrievable. So cross-referencing is very necessary. Cross-ref is very important. And that means if your articles can be easily linked to the cross-ref, and that means other researchers can have the access similar to yours. Okay, for balance, check for well-balanced list of references, and that means helpful to the reader. So there is a particular style for that. And then fair to competing authors, because they can access also the references that you have been able to quote in your research output, and then not over reliant on self-citations. So because we have our outputs as well, we will not only rely on our output, what we have been able to find in our research, and cite our own work in our own work. So not over-reliant on self-citations. And so if that is the case, then we give due recognition to the discoveries of other researchers, especially on initial discoveries and some works that are going to be under assessment. So plagiarism, this is very important. Identified concern and suspected concern. Plagiarism is whether self-plagiarism or plagiarism really is already a ground for the rejection of the paper. So we have to take note of this. So as much as possible, we have to express in our own words what we learn from the cited references, from the references that we cite. In other words, we have to learn something from the references that we cite. We have to be able to do the literature review right, because for us to be able to avoid plagiarism, we have to write down our own understanding of the literature review, and we have to write down our own understanding of the cited references. So we have lots of reference, we have already lots of software that will enable us to do plagiarism check, and we, as much as possible, before submitting our work, let's subject our work to those plagiarism check softwares. So search engine optimization, we have lots of search engine already. We can actually look into Google Scholar, because I am fond of looking at Google Scholar, but then some academic databases can actually make us know what are those quality or what the quality references are saying. So that's why as much as possible, we can be able to optimize the use of search engines. So in structuring our report, we can structure our report in the following manner: summary, major issues, and minor issues. So the summary must be able to give at first positive feedback. So do not right away write the negative feedbacks in the first paragraph that will make the authors depressed or upset when getting the comments of their works. So we will be more sensitive on this aspect. Let's have to give the positive feedback first, then briefly summarize what the paper is about, what the findings are, and try to put the findings of the paper into the context of the existing literature and current knowledge, and then the significance of the work or the novelty of the work strengths will have to be emphasized, the quality and the completeness, and after that, the flaws or the weaknesses. In other words, the areas or aspects that need to be improved will be highlighted after the positive feedback. So the major issues, you can refer to this slide for the major issues because these are the ones that will enable you to reliably or confidently suggest for major revision of the submitted output. So minor issues are like this, and we have already cited the minor issues. And so if there are just minor issues, usually we usually write down suggestions about the minor revisions. So on presentation and style, as much as possible, let's be polite. Let's be honest and let's be clear. Be objective and constructive, because we might not know if it's our turn to subject our outputs for peer review. We might not know that we will be receiving all of these things, all of the comments that might hurt us. Okay, so also write clearly as much as possible. Don't be vague. Don't be vague in your suggestions. So our vernacular will not be used whenever we are going to write down reviews of articles that are submitted for publication, especially if it is an international journal. Everything must be in English. So avoid complex or unusual words so that we will not be able to confuse the speakers, native speakers especially. Number our points, what must be revised as major aspect to be revised. So we have to put in numbers, and also put in numbers the minor revisions. So treat the author's work the way you would like your own to be treated. That is the, I think, the last message that I would wish you to get. So in other words, you have to be empathetic. In other words, you try to feel what the author is trying to come up with their work and what they are driving at, so that you can understand how you are going to approach your review of the submitted output. So criticisms and confidential comments to editors, you can actually write the comments to the editors, and confidential comments to the editors, and also some recommendations, criticisms. Usually, you will not be allowed to do this. But then if there are suspected plagiarism, for instance, there is fraud, there is unattributed work, unethical procedures, there is duplication of the publication, bias, and other conflicts of interest, you can send a confidential comment to the editor. So, as much as possible, let's stay fair. Let's be ethical in doing our peer review process. So write our comments, write down our comments empathetically, and other things that will have to be some suspicions, especially about the issues on plagiarism and no proper attribution of the cited, no proper attributions of the lines in the research output. We can send this to the editor. So the recommendations, please use the major flaws, the minor flaws, and as well as the other information that was given in the first presentation, in accepting, rejecting, and in suggesting minor revision, or in suggesting major revisions and resubmission of the manuscript or submitted outputs. So recommending acceptance, give details why you are recommending right away. And then recommending revision, you have to be clear what are going to be revised and what is really the extent of revision. Is it major or minor? And recommending rejections, you have to revisit the guideline on when recommending rejection in the journal publisher's website. So when recommending rejections, you must be able to to point out clearly the serious flaws for the rejection. So recommendations for the author, give them constructive feedback and give them the right focus of the research. Avoid making critical, confidential comments to the editor. And then constructive criticism, that is very important. So some tips to the reviewers: respond promptly to the invitations. So do not delay your response. Give your yes or no right away. If you have time, you say yes. If you don't have time, you say no, and then explain to the invitation. Then show your integrity. Show your integrity by being fair in your review. So what are your bases in saying so? Be prepared for doing that. Then stay within the scope. So always look at the aims and scope of the journal publishers. For the reviewers, you always be guided by the aims and scope of the paper. Okay, so that you can say the submitted output is not anymore within, or it needs to be reassigned to another journal publisher. Then be constructive as much as possible. Be constructive. Allocate enough time, because you cannot get right away the message of the submitted article at first glance. You need also time to digest what that article was talking about and what it is driving at. Be consistent. Be consistent in your review, actually. Then focus on the research. Do not focus on the way the research is written, on the language, because The language is just a tool. The style is just a tool. No, you focus on the research. Sorry. Look at
Dr.
the
Raquel, I mean,
look at the conclusion first. So look at the conclusion first, and then check the robustness of facts. What is the source of the facts? And then are these facts reliable? And what is this? Where is this facts? I mean, applicable? What particular group or target audience is being talked about by the facts? And then give credit where it is due. So proper citations. Acknowledge the sources of your information, and also be able to send requests for the use of tables, for the use of paradigms, for the use of models, for the use of figures in your research to the authors of those figures. So give proper recognition and requests in the use of relevant tables, relevant figures and models. So that is all. Thank you very much for your time.
well, wait, probably before going into the questions and answer, I would like to say probably this in Tagalog, ang galing mo.
Thank
You were
very much.
amazing.
I'm
Yeah, actually,
sorry.
no, hindi ako maruko mag-Tagalog po. I mean that I don't understand Tagalog, but yeah, you were very amazing because I know 3 hours speaking is, and you're not losing every single minute your energy. That's why I adore you very much.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. So that's why I believe all the participants also not losing their energy. So that's why you have the last chance to ask any questions. In this case, please. Oh yes, amazing. Mrs. Novi, please open your microphone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ratna. Ms. Raquel,
Yes.
really
Hello.
very inspiring because your energy is really, really good.
Well, I have to
3 hours non-stop. Okay.
But then I have
let's-
to say something first. I'm doing this for my friends in your university, to Ago, si Chade, and to Andre. If they happen to be not my friends, I will not be saying yes to this invitation.
what really, you are a really inspiring speaker for us.
Yeah.
Ms. Raquel, I have a question. Last month, we just attend, we call it Scopus Camp. So the training is, they teach us how to prepare, so it's easy to our paper to be accepted for Scopus journal like that. And one of their trick is we must, as author, we must make like a letter for reviewer. Then the letter, they told us that the letter can influence the reviewer to accept our paper. Based on your experience, really that letter can influence yourself to accept a paper, or maybe if the letter can influence the reviewer to accept our paper, what must we write in that letter? Like maybe we must describe about our content, about our paper, maybe our novelty or etc. I don't know. Maybe you can teach us about that. We need or not to send that letter when we submit our paper like that. Thank you so much.
Oh, yes. Thank you for your question. It's my first time to hear that you can write the reviewer. You can write a letter to the reviewer of your submitted output. What I've been able to experience is writing that to the editor. But then I think for the reviewers, especially for double blind, for collaborative blind reviews, usually you do not need it. The quality of your paper, the way it is being written, the way it is being prepared will actually will be the basis of the acceptance of the paper. I do not know, but in some other cases, probably you can write the reviewers, but that is when you know who the reviewers are. Okay, because for the blind reviewers, for the blind peer review process, you do not know. Both authors and reviewers do not know each other, especially for collaborative blind review process, which is very common among the big brands in academic publishing: Springer, Elsevier, John Wiley and Sons, Taylor and Francis in PDI. There are many. PLOS, laws. Those are the ones that will really look into the paper itself. Then they do not. They will consider your letter, but because of the double-blind collaborative review process, you cannot be able to know. You cannot be able to know who the reviewers are. But you can write the editor about your work, explaining your work. This work is done in this way and it is addressed for this particular gap.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I see. I think,
Yes.
yeah, probably the slight differences is what Mrs. Novi asked, whether we can send a letter to the reviewer. And meanwhile, what we normally do is send the letter to the editor, because we send to the editor through the process for the peer review, because we don't really know who are the reviewers. But
Yes.
yeah, but that's really good. I mean, that interesting questions. Ms. Novis, your questions have been answered.
Okay, Mrs. Ratna,
Yeah, thank you.
so much.
Is there any other questions, please? We have 10 minutes to end these sessions. Or probably, Mr. Andre, do you have any something that you can share between Agri-Economica peer review process that probably can be adopted from what we have today? What do you think?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ratna. Ladies and gentlemen, actually this activity is part of international competitive grant sponsored by Directorate General of Higher Education. In 2020, our Department of Agribisnis, got this competitive grant, Raquel. So the focus of this program is to increase the international competitiveness. We have some program, for example, we still providing international accreditation for agribusiness. And then in this event, we have Agri-Economica Journal and Miss Raquel and then Pak Agus, also our editor and reviewer in our journal. We have planning to go international. So we try to increase our quality of the Agri-Economica. This way, in this event, we try to have chance for all of editor and reviewer of Agri-Economica to have some, what we call, some new knowledge from you about how to be a international reviewer. Because since August 2020, we only accept article in English. So we also invite some author from other countries to participate in our journal. This way, in this event, I would like to thanks to Dr. Raquel Balanay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I hope you help our journal in order to have more broader international networking, especially how to develop communication among scientists around the world. I already asked to Miss Ratna. Miss Ratna is also student, Raquel, in New Zealand.
I see. Yes,
And she is also have been at UPLB, right, Bu Ratna, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah, I went there for my sit-in student 6 months.
Sit-in
only.
student, yeah. So in this event, we have four former students at UPLB, Mas Agus, me, you, and Ratna.
Yeah.
And then again, with thanks for very valuable 3 sessions from you. For me, it's very, very valuable. And then I got many insight about how to be a good reviewer. Sorry. And the second, thanks to all editors and reviewers that always support totally for Jurnal Agrikomika, Pak Agus, Pak Joko, and all of our colleagues, Agribisnis Department. And the last for the head of the department, Bu Novi, Pak Slamet, SS PIC, and also for Bu Ratna. Good luck with your study, and we are waiting for you soon. I think that's all. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Raquel, and maybe we will have some very productive collaboration, and you also my colleagues in our research international collaboration. Thank you very much, Bu Ratna. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah. Do you have any response, probably, Dr. Raquel, or if?
Yeah, I'm really happy that Doc Andre and also Dr. Andre and Dr. Agus Tichade, we again get to collaborate with each other. We've been how many years were we? But it was more of Agus and me and his family, and also some Indonesian.
Yeah.
Dr. Panji Juranto.
Yeah.
Because we are in the
Oh,
same,
Mr. Panji.
and Dr. Andre just came later. So yes, so I already graduated, but then we are able to get in touch with each other again. I'm going to visit Luan Lee.
Vietnam.
Yes, in Vietnam by April. I was also working with Luan on some papers, and because of some time limit, I was not able to revise the paper, but then I do not know what Luan was actually doing, but we were into co-authorship. Yes. And yes, thank you very much for the invitation to be part of the reviewers, editor of your Agroeconomica. It's really a very good an avenue to really, you have to start somewhere, and that is a very good avenue to start with. So I wish I can also contribute to your journal someday. I'm still trying to find some time to really write an article and also train my staff to write articles for publication. So I hope someday I can submit to your journal as well.
But I have to make you should be aware after this reviewer training, perhaps we will getting more strict to review your paper.
Yeah. Yeah, actually I'm into lots of I'm a bit guilty because I have lots of invites to review papers, but then I really do not have time because in the Philippines right now we are now back to face-to-face, and lots of travel, so that's why I have to turn down lots of invites, except this invitation to talk with you and also to talk with Inda in Brawijaya.
Brawijaya.
Yeah.
Yes, in PIC, because I was once invited. So because I know you guys, so that's why I cannot just say no unless I really have a very tough time right here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
So thank you very much. By the way, is it okay to have a photo opportunity?
Oh yeah, sure. Probably before that, at first, thank you for making us the top priority. I just would like to give a short conclusion, please. Just a short, very short conclusion about today's activity. That actually everyone can be reviewers based on their expertise.
Yes.
But of course, we still need to hone our skill. We need to improve our skill, because it's not being a reviewer is not about how to criticize other people's work, but it is more providing valuable, constructive comments as a friends, as a colleague, because we talk in the same language. We try to speak in our language through our publications to
Yes.
other academics. And so doing a correct review is extremely important. And that's why today we have learned a lot from you, Dr. Raquel. Thank you very much. So today we will have a photo session sharing session, please. Who will take the picture, Mr. Slamet? Do you think who's going to take it? Should we count it? Or do you mind to count it, please? Oh, sorry, I meant to Mr. Slamet. To Mr. Slamet.
Okay.
No, you.
I do not also know how to take
Oh, sorry.
Okay. 1, 2. Okay.
Okay.
Last
Thank you
slide.
very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much once
Thank
again.
you very
Raquel.
much, Miss Raquel.
Mas Baratna. See you.
Yeah, okay,
you.
thank you.
See
So
you soon.
this is the end of our meeting. Bye-bye. Have a good day and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Thank you.
wabarakatuh. Miss you so much, Miss Ratna.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Juga sama.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Oke, bye Raquel.
Thank you, Raquel.
Yes, you're welcome,
Thank you so
Agus. You're
much.
welcome, Andre.
Makasih Mas Agus.
Matur nuwun Pak Andri atas
Oke,
undangannya,
sama-sama.
nggih. Matur nuwun sangat, nggih. Semoga grup komunitas makin berkembang.
Oke, Pak Ciko, matur suwun.
Terima kasih, Bapak Ibu.
Thank you, Raquel.
Izin.
Bye-bye.
Nggih.